Hello. Do you guys like it?
Well, welcome to Boston, and we are so excited to have you. So thank you for coming here and really bringing us this gift of the film that you have made. I just want to start out in terms of just noting that not only am I the festival director of the Boston Asian American Film Festival, I'm also the mother of a 13-year-old, and I happen to be an immigrant too. So there was a lot of notes in here that I definitely connected with.
Is he angsty? Is he?
I won't. No comment.
Okay.
We're really excited to sort of have been on this journey with you in terms of being able to present Nai Nai and Wai Paw. I'm just curious, has folks who've seen it out there? Oh, fantastic, great.
For those who haven't seen it, the grandma in this movie is my grandma. Did you guys know that? Whoa, this is so cool. Hold on. I want to send this video to my grandma. Oh my God. Wow, what an ego boost.
I love it, I love it.
For my grandma.
So congratulations, Nai Nai and Wai Paw won our audience award at the film festival last fall. And since then you've been to Sundance to premiere this film, and you've also been nominated for an Oscar for Nai Nai and Wai Paw. So congratulations to all of those accreditations. It certainly has taken a lot.
Thank you.
I just wanted to start and actually ask a little bit about how much of the film is based on actual events versus inspired by?
At this point, I think it's all a little nebulous. Take what you will from that. But you know, I think I really do, like, there's one thing I love about watching movies that are, you know, kind of in that bucket of personal storytelling. I think of movies like Lady Bird or Beginners or 400 Blows. I do like the experience as an audience member when I watch those movies and I think to myself, oh, when does the life of the filmmaker end and when does the character or the movie begin? It doesn't change the way I kind of process the movie and the story, but it does, to me, it's just like an extra layer of fun. Even shows like Rami, too. I'm like, did Rami hook up with his cousin? That's weird. But it, you know, it doesn't change the way I feel about the show. To me, that's just, I don't know, like a fun extra layer. And so I think for me, everything I think started from a very real place, but again, once you start writing and once you start kind of, you know, thinking about the themes of the story and what the story needs to do and how to make it a narrative and not just events, then it kind of, you know, you start combining things, you start dramatizing, you start fictionalizing, you start tearing things away, and it really just ends up kind of becoming its own thing. And they really, you know, early on, they started to just really become characters. Obviously, again, like Chris, you can draw the parallels to me, but even now I look at Chris and I certainly see myself in him, but to me he is like a character, like maybe a version of me, but hopefully he's a version of everybody in this room. You can hopefully see a version of yourself in him.
No, I feel like even besides Chris, you've been able to sort of incorporate a very multi-generational cast that really, I think anybody watching it can find themselves in it. So that was really a beautiful creative move that you were able to incorporate. In terms of like building that story and narrative that you've had, you know, one of the things about the film festival, our perspective is that art really is medicine. And I'm curious how making this film was medicine for you.
Medicine, I've never heard that before. I think it's both, oh, sorry. You know, I think people say like candy and medicine, right? And I think, you know, medicine, I think has sort of a little negative connotation.
Oh, so maybe not medicine. I just mean like healing.
Oh, healing.
Sorry.
Healing.
Okay. So like yes.
No, making the movie was certainly healing, but again, I think even going back to that, what I was just saying, like it is both candy and medicine. You know, like it was healing in the sense that it wasn't just me trying to like unpack certain things about my childhood or certain, you know, it wasn't just like a trauma dump and trauma exploration. It was hopefully an exploration of joy at the same time, and innocence and irreverence. You know, this movie is just as inspired by things like Jackass that made me and my friends laugh, as it is, you know, trying to explore the loneliness of childhood. And I think you need both sides of the coin. Things can't just be medicine in that sense. You know, I think the thing I thought a lot about while making this movie, I think it's a quote from Spielberg, that a writer that worked with him, what's her name? The writer of The Post. Does anyone know? Liz Hannah. I think someone asked her a question on Twitter that was like, what was the best thing about working with Spielberg? What advice did he give? And she said, if you can get them to laugh, they'll trust you to cry. So I think that's something I really took into this movie, which was like, oh, if we can kind of, you know, bring in the irreverence and comedy and joy of adolescence, and hopefully we can also get to the things that are tougher to stomach and stuff that was, you know, harder to write and also hopefully healing to make.
Yeah, well, I'll have to say, definitely for me, at least watching this, the healing part was at the end. I really appreciated how much you gave words to the mother role. I think that has been something very new, or not often seen, especially for immigrant mothers, to be able to express, you know, their feelings to especially their sons. So in terms of being a mother, really appreciating that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm curious, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
Did you watch the movie more through the lens of motherhood or through the lens of like your own childhood?
Ooh, probably a little bit more of my own childhood, because that was sort of like having been through that time period and recognizing a lot of those symbols. And I think, and maybe also just with the lens of the Asian American Film Festival, it was just seeing so many things that stood out to me. I'll just share, like, even that scene, just watching his skater friends come into the house and they don't take off their shoes. I was like, oh my gosh. And the have you eaten, just that, you know, sort of just being like recognizing those sort of markers of, you know, Asian American experience that I think many of us who come from that background really can attach to. So, yeah.
It's beautiful, thanks.
So speaking actually of that time period, 2008, I'll just note too for those folks, the film festivals also was sort of officially born in 2008 as well, so a very significant year, 16 years now. I'm curious about how 2008 was a character for you and sort of what was important about actually expressing that through your script.
Well, I said it in 2008 because that's when the film festival was born. And I knew we were gonna bring it here to Boston, so. No, I think everything with this movie, before I could think about it in terms of like theme or anything, it really just kind of went back to the personal. You know, I think it started from there. I was like, okay, what was my life like when I was 13? And I was 13 in 2008. And when I thought about the specifics of that, again, there's all of the world of it, which is, you know, being sort of a child of immigrants and an Asian kid in a sea full of a lot of Asian kids. You know, he has a very diverse friend group in this movie, and yet he still doesn't quite feel like he belongs. That was something that I felt like was specific to the world that I grew up in, sort of being an outsider among outsiders. And then, so I was like, okay, that's one thing that feels specific to this version of the movie. And then again, like the internet of the times. I think that to me is the biggest signifier of the 2008, I guess, like time stamp. And I think it was the thing I was also really excited about, because I think you look at like the seminal movies of that time that have made a lasting impression, movies like Superbad or even like Pineapple Express. Scattered applause. But I think all the movies about you know, teenagers that were sort of made in the late 2000s, that are set in the late 2000s, they never cut to screens. They never incorporate the internet. And I think I've heard filmmakers, you know, over the last decade kind of talk about how the internet is inherently uncinematic, and you see a lot of movies and storytellers kind of work around the internet. And I think for me, I had worked at a team at Google called Creative Lab for what was supposed to be 1 year, turned into 6. And it was basically my job and what I did for work up until I made this movie. And what I was doing there was really, you know, learning how to take these cold interfaces that we use every day and apply them and make them human and emotional and cinematic. It's not unlike, you know, Searching, that was, you know, directed by a good friend of mine, Anish Chaganty. And I think for me, you know, when that movie came out, I was like, oh, he just did the best version of it. But I think for us, it was sort of like, well, the internet that I remember growing up, it felt a little bit more innocent and naive, and it was sort of this sort of onset of being on the internet, where it's not like right now where all of us have the entire world's information in our pocket at all times, and we can access it. I remember in 13, like if you click the internet on your flip phone, you'd be like, oh shit, like exit, I don't want to spend $1, or just
so much money, yeah.
Yeah, it costs a lot of money, and you had limited text messages, and you could sign off. The way I pitched it was like, it was this pre-technology era, this late MySpace, early Facebook. I remember I was on MySpace, my sister was on Facebook, I was on Zynga, she was on LiveJournal. It just kind of felt like this transitional period in our collective relationship with technology that never was accurately captured, because I think by the time filmmakers knew how to capture it, the technology had completely changed. And so again, it just felt like what was personal was also an opportunity to revisit and hopefully do something that felt fresh and unique.
It certainly did. I think in terms of this being, there's a vast number of coming-of-age stories, but the specificity that you used and were able to apply, specifically in that use of technology, was brilliant. I feel like the layers that so many. Anyhow, I'll stop. I'm about to open up to audience questions, so if those of you start preparing your questions, but this is my last question that I've got for you here. So I read that this script took 7 years for you to write, and sort of from that time through Sundance, I'm curious if you could actually share a time when maybe you felt like you were it wasn't gonna happen, like that it was an obstacle for you, but yet somehow the universe gave you what you needed to continue on.
That's a good question. Well, I think, I'm still a young filmmaker, but, when I started writing this, I was 22 or 23, and I sort of had, I guess, the privilege of having older filmmaker friends to kind of look at, and I love looking at old, filmmakers and sort of studying their careers and how they kind of got things made, and I remember distinctly two things. One, I had a lot of friends who were kind of cutting their teeth on shorts and commercials and music videos. Obviously, they had feature ambitions, and like a lot of filmmakers do. And then they got a chance to make a feature, and they had never really spent the time to write anything because they were cutting their teeth on shorts. And then they got this feature opportunity, and then but they didn't spend any time kind of developing a script. It was just like jumping at the opportunity. And I think what I learned just from afar was, and now that I've made a feature, is that it's the problem solving is exponential. If you don't solve it in the script, you're gonna run into problems in production. And then if you don't solve it in production, you're gonna run into problems in post. And so if you rush a script, you're just trying to fix that in every stage. And so then they spend 2 years, 3 years making this movie, and it just isn't that good because, again, it's rushed. And I think I was like, I don't want to fall into that trap. And so I was like, while I make my shorts, I'm going to just chip away at this script. And it was also, I remember reading something about Destin Daniel Cretton, where when he was trying to make Short Term 12, he wrote that script and no one would let him make that movie, even though it was pretty contained and small, because he had never made a movie before. And so he went and made this other movie called I Am Not a Hipster, just to prove that he could make a feature. And then that premiered at Sundance, and then he made Short Term 12, which I love. It's like one of the movies that made me think I could make features. And I was like, well, I'm gonna write something where even though I've never made a feature film before, if you like this script, I'm clearly the right director for this. You're not gonna go find another director to make this movie. And so over the course of those 7 years, I would kind of chip away at it, and I never wrote unless, in those early years, unless I was inspired. I would if I got stuck and got writer's block, then I'd just go work on a short or go back to Google and make commercials. And then I would just jot down notes, and then I would be like, oh, I have 5 pages of notes, let's go back and write. I think a roadblock would be, we kind of started putting this together on a moving train. I didn't really start trying to get it off the ground until 2022, and that's when Carlos Lopez Estrada, our first producer, came on board. And we had kind of been friends already for 3 or 4 years. And I sent it to him, and I was like, hey, I'm trying to make this movie. What do you think? It's bigger than the movie I worked on with him. I worked on a tiny little indie with him. I was like, it's bigger than Summertime, but smaller than Blind Spotty, I'm pretty sure. You shot in the Bay Area. What do you think? We spent a year trying to get it off the ground while continuing to work on the script, and everybody said no. Everybody said, we love it, but it's also too small for our company. And I was like, what does that mean? Just give us your leftover money. I don't. It's what do you mean it's too small? It's not a real problem. But yeah, so that was a lot of like, I think once we actually started trying to get it made, then it became roadblocks. And then we just started making it without any money. Like we had a little bit of development money, we started casting it. And then I remember one day I was just like, man, a lot of things have to happen for this to feasibly start rolling cameras and when we want to, which was like a year ago today, basically. And then within 24 hours, like the film gods answered our prayers, and like 80% of our financing fell into place. And then I remember being very stressed because my producers were like, I think you're shooting the movie this summer. There's no looking back. Start prepping. And I was like, oh shit.
Be careful what you ask for. Yeah,
exactly.
Folks out there, are there any questions?
We brought candy too, by the way. If you ask a question, I'm gonna throw you a peach.
And just a note, if you can also, I expect that there's probably a lot of questions, so we want to be able to get to as many as we can. So if you can be pretty succinct about your question, that we'd appreciate it.
All right, I'll keep mine nice and short. So you have a lot of child actors in this film, and I haven't seen anything else that you've done, so I'm guessing this may be one of the first times you've done that. So like, how do you direct for that, especially with like a lot of the tougher shots with children?
You want this?
Of course.
I'll underhand this. All right, ready?
Oh. Nice catch.
Teamwork. That's what filmmaking's about. It's about community. Yeah, well, I think, when we first started putting this movie together and started to cast it, I really wanted kids like the kids that I sort of, one that felt like me and my friends growing up, which were these sort of like, we weren't very nice, for lack of a better word. But also like when I watch Stand By Me and 400 Blows, like those kids feel so raw and authentic, and they don't feel like child actors by any means. So all the kids minus the lead kid in this movie had never acted before. They were like found at skate parks and basketball camps and middle schools. Some of them saw our open casting call on Instagram or TikTok and just submitted a tape just because they were like, oh, sounds cool. And all their tapes were like, yo, what's up? I'm Raul. I don't know, this is my dog. I play golf. All right, peace. And it was like, those were the kids we were kind of looking for, this sort of like, they weren't trying to impress you. They were just kind of like, oh, this is cool. And it was just like months and months and months of Zooms with, anytime we found a kid that was like sort of found like they had a spark, it was, it's nerve-wracking for any kid to walk onto like all of a sudden like an audition, right? And I think for me, it was really just trying to tap back into this 14, 15-year-old self. And there's like hundreds of tapes of me improvising with 14-year-olds. And I just really had to just kind of show them that like, this is what the language of the movie is. It's not like something that's so proper. It's like, no, you can curse and you can, without saying like curse, but like we're encouraging them to be a version of themselves, like we didn't want them to be like the version of themselves with their parents or their teachers. It was like, what it's like to be a teenager with your friends, like bring that to our movie. And ultimately it was that, like I did so many Zooms and auditions and chemistry reads over Zoom, and I just felt that electricity, even through a computer screen. I was like, there's something here with these kids, and if we can bring them onto set and use the bells and whistles of filmmaking, like cinematography and blocking and all that stuff, and just let them translate whatever we're doing on the computer onto set, we're gonna be okay. And then ultimately, my job on set really was, okay, for every kid, the first day on set was like, what the fuck? Because it was like going from Zoom, and also like 7 trucks and 80 people and giant camera, and they're like, whoa. And my job was just be like, no, not ignore all of this, but like, this is all here for you. Like, don't change what you were doing over Zoom. Like, what we were doing there is why you're here. So don't think you have to all of a sudden do something different. And then I think after the first hour or two of every day, and they got to know the crew, and we had a very young crew, like, and everybody was, sort of fun-loving, and we're blasting music on set, and we kind of just tried to really, really curate it so that it was a fun set. And like, that was really important to me. It was just like, even if the movie sucked, I was like, these kids have to have a good time. Like, these kids have to have fun. it'll make their performances better, but I think we were all on the same board of just like, we're asking a lot of these kids to spend one of their most formative summers of their childhood with us, and we're bringing them into something that is so foreign to them. If they walk away from this with like a bad time or a bad experience, I think it would make them feel bad, it would make us feel bad, and so we went way out of our way to just make sure the set felt fun. We got like churro machines, we put on a talent show on our indie budget, which was, a good use of money, but it was still money, something we kind of had to like convince people to let us do.
Great. I'm just getting a note that we have about 5 minutes left, so maybe if we can
I'll
get
keep the answer short.
two more questions in.
The family dynamic of the story was absolutely beautiful right here. And I was curious how you were able to take such unique storylines for each individual character while also making it a cohesive storyline for the whole family unit. I was wondering if you could speak to that. Sure.
Oh, all right, here, I got you one more.
It didn't hit the ground,
Got it? Okay, cool.
Thank you.
I think just, really taking time with the script, and me and my producer, Carlos, we really did like character sheets also for every character, and it was just, sort of pages and pages of backstory and trying to flesh out the characters as much as possible, even if it's not lines or directly on the page, and trying to give them, like you're really seeing the movie from Chris's perspective, but trying to give as much material to the actors so that it doesn't just feel like they exist in the scenes, but they really exist throughout the movie, and you can feel it. And so I made playlists for every character. For Joan, who plays the mother, and Isaac, and Shirley, and Maddie, and Fahad, and Soup, for all of the sort of like primary roles. I wrote backstories and bullet point biographies, and just kind of, hopefully it was enough for them to just kind of like, okay, this is the character separate from just the things that are scripted. It was like, this is where they went to elementary school, this is her favorite color, this is all this stuff, and I was like, feel free to add stuff, and if you don't like any of this, like change it, make it your own. And so it was just a combination of, I think, doing as much as I could on the page, and then trying to give the actors as much material that they could just sink their teeth into, whether it was like in the script or not.
Great, and we got time for one last question out there.
Hello. I was wondering how, when you were writing the script, there's a lot of moments, like throughout the movie, I'm right over here, throughout the movie, where there's just like, especially moments where you just feel like, oh no. How was it like writing that and like trying to pick out the memories where you just remember, oh, that was just really cringy, especially when it's something like, I don't really want to share this with people in retrospect. If I can catch it, yeah.
Let's go. Ready? Oh, that was a good throw. Again, like it went back to the idea that, like, it's weird doing Q&As, and I'm like, I think the whole audience thinks Chris is me, and like I went through all of that. But I think over the course of writing the movie, I remember having a meeting with a creative advisor through the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, and we talked a lot about the difference between. Well, first off, I always knew, I was like, I think the theme of this movie that everything has to point towards is shame, like the way that shame manifests itself in a young Asian American boy's life, and how those different versions of shame, whether it's personal shame, cultural shame, societal shame, how that all kind of manifests into different emotions like fear or loneliness or sadness, and how all of that kind of prevents him from kind of accepting different forms of love, whether it's love from his family, his mom, self-love. And that was like, okay, I think that's kind of the theme of the movie that everything has to point back towards. And I remember having a conversation with Eliza Hittman at the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, and we talked a lot about the difference between embarrassment and shame. And embarrassment is all the stuff that I think you're saying, like the cringy stuff that is really funny, and I think that we can mine for comedy, and like the how to kiss stuff, and like that's embarrassing, but it's not like shameful, and then it doesn't, and then she was like, okay, well, what is the stuff that he feels shame about? And so I think for me, it was, again, knowing that was kind of part of the theme, and how embarrassment leads to shame, and then how shame manifests in anger. And it really was, we trying to just find these moments that like started with something real, but then it was like, how can we continue to just twist the dagger on Chris and make him feel more out of place and more out of place and more out of place? And I really didn't, for better or worse, I didn't really think of it as like, oh, what are people going to think of me? Because by the time the movie became its own orbit, I was like, oh, how do we, Chris is like a vessel to serve the themes of the story. That being said, there's some embarrassing things in there. I'm like, yeah, I guess, I don't know, people are going to think I peed in my sister's lotion or something. I don't know.
But you actually have a sister.
I do have a sister.
Older
I don't know if I peed in her lotion. I can't remember.
Nothing that you'd admit. Okay, got it. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for being here. It was really an amazing time to be able to spend with you and this presentation. And thank you so much to the Coolidge Corner Theatre for amazingly hosting this and bringing this, helping to bring this to Boston, and to Focus Features for really endorsing and making it possible so that we can all have access to this film. And thank you to IFFB, Independent Film Festival of Boston, and there's a ton of volunteers here from the Boston Asian American Film Festival too. Please check us all out. We're really the ecosystem here in Boston that supports independent cinema, and it all depends a lot on you. The connection between artists, really important artists, have stories to tell, and the audiences that really want to see them. Please, I encourage you all to take a moment after you leave today to text somebody, email them, tell them about Dìdi. It is just coming out in those 10 cities. If it does well, it will go on to more and bigger and greater things. You have all witnessed how amazing the film is. Please, that's one small thing that each individual of you can take. Sean, I just want to say thank you so much again. It was amazing to have you here. We can't wait to see what else comes from you next. And please know that you've got a place here in Boston, and we've got this community here waiting for you to come back.
Thank you. Thank you guys this is so, wow. Okay. Oh my God. I'm gonna hide behind this camera.
You enjoy it. I'm gonna.
Who wants candy? Thank you guys so much. Seriously, that was, here you go. That was the nicest thing ever. Thank you guys so much. I really hope you liked the movie. Thank you guys for staying.